I wanted to make a quick video explaining the what, why, and how of my new mod, the Universal Enemy Compatibility patch. I'm going to start with the what for anyone who doesn't have time for the rest of it. What this mod aims to fix is if you've ever run a campaign with lots and lots of enemy mods, and you notice that some enemies didn't show up very much, and other enemies showed up literally constantly and stole the spotlight, that's the problem that this mod tries to fix. This mod rebalances a lot of things behind the scenes to create an environment where you should see different enemies in roughly equal proportion, and there will still be weights. Some things will be more common than others and less common than others, because that's how it should be. You should see more advent in the early game. You should see more mutons if you've installed 15 muton mods and nothing for anything else. It doesn't just make everything the equal weight, it tries to make it all roughly equal so that nothing's completely stealing the show, but still in proportion in sensible ways. Now, for those of you who have the time to hear the rest of it, we need to start with how the game actually generates pods so that we can explain the problem that's happening and then how it was fixed. For the purpose of explaining how pod generation works, I'm going to be talking about a hypothetical terror mission, because everyone intuitively knows that terror missions do not have the same enemies as normal missions. You see berserkers and chrysalids here, but not on your regular guerrilla ops, and the reason for that is because every mission type there is in the game is going to pull an encounter list. Terror missions will specifically pull from terror leaders and terror followers. And the reason for having two, leaders and followers, is because you need to subdivide enemies like that, leaders and followers, because if there was only one group of terror enemies in general, then nothing would stop the game from having 4 sectopods in a group. You don't want 4 sectopods in a group, so instead you have sectopods only ever showing up as leaders, and you have troopers only ever showing up as followers. That's the purpose of the leader and follower system. Now when you start generating a pod for that terror mission, first it rolls a dice for the encounter leaders table. Let's say there are 5 enemies on there, they all have a weight of 1. You roll a 5-sided dice, it comes up for one of the enemies, that's your leader now. For the other 3 people in the pod, let's just say it's 3 people, you're going to roll on the followers table. All the enemies in the game that are capable of being leaders have something called a supported follower list. And this is the list of enemies that are allowed to explicitly follow them. They have to be whitelisted by supported followers, otherwise they can't show up in that leader's pod. And the reason for this is to allow some amount of theming in the game, right? Because of stuff like this, you're not going to be seeing sectoids following mech leaders, for instance. So the way we generate the second part of the pod, the 3 followers, is you make a Venn diagram. On the one hand, you have the supported followers for the enemy leading the pod. On the other hand, you have the encounter list followers for that mission type. The overlap in the middle, the supported followers that have been given force levels and weights by the encounter list, is what's rolled to generate the 3 remaining people in the pod. This system is perfectly functional and adequate, and it was great for the base game and its 20-ish enemies. But when you install dozens of mods and you increase it from 20 enemies to 200, you start to encounter some growing pains that my mod aims to fix. There are 2 things my mod fixes and 1 thing that is a massive breakthrough compared to my previous enemy compatibility patches, and I'm going to go through them in order of importance. The first thing we need to fix is encounter weights. We need to re-weight all the mod-added enemies in the game, because if you don't do that, you're still just going to see biodivision. Nothing else we do will actually matter if all you see is biodivision, so we have to re-weight all the enemies according to a new scale, and I've done that. The second thing we need to do, which becomes much more important now that everyone's showing up the same amount, is cross-referencing the supported followers list. As an example, sectopods can be followed by basically all the aliens, and that's also true for any mod-added enemy, because they'll add support for base game enemies, of course they will, but they can't add support for all of the mod-added enemies. So you'll end up in situations where if a base game sectopod spawns, it'll be rolling to get like all the muton elite enemies, all the harder war enemies, all the fanatics, all these crazy hard mode enemies will be rolling to see if they can spawn as the sectopod's follower. But if you were to get sectopod prime from a better admin, which should by all accounts be a more threatening unit, you don't roll for any of that. You only roll for the base game stuff and the mod added enemies that have explicit support for better advent, because otherwise it hasn't been whitelisted. These mods weren't made by the same person. There's no direct overlap. The whitelist isn't there. So we need to cross-reference across all the mods, all the supported follower lists, and that is how we're going to get everyone to follow everyone that they should, because we can't just put every enemy on every other enemy, then you lose all theming, it doesn't make sense, so you have to do all of this with some degree of care and concern. Previously, that's how my enemy compatibility patches worked. I went through by hand, rebuilt supported followers for everyone, re-weighted everything, and that was barbaric. The problem with that approach is twofold, one of which I didn't know about, the other of which is the reason I don't like my original enemy compatibility patches. The first problem that I only recently found out about is that mod configs are not affected by the run after command. That's only for scripts. Why does that matter? My mods are entirely config only. So what was supposed to happen is my mod would load after all the supported mods, and then they would remove those original encounter lists from the config and put in their own. Instead, what happens is that all these mods are loaded at the start based on Steam ID. And that's entirely out of my hands. What that means is that very early mods, like A Better Advent, and any mods released after mine, like Standalone, Long War the Chosen, Alien Pack, are not being properly removed by my mod. And there's nothing I can do about the original compatibility patches. It's just a fundamental problem with editing it with configs. This has been fixed. We're going to get to that in a second about the new mod. But on the old mods, that was a massive problem that I became aware of shortly before I started working on this one. The other problem they have is I think the one people are much more familiar with. If you wanted to use those mods, then you have to run those enemies, or you have to edit them. There's no alternative. It's why I subdivided them to try to make it less of a hassle for people. As an example, if you wanted to run the ECP for mutants, you could either run all the mutants I supported, or you could go into my file and physically delete the configs for the encounter list for every mod I support that you didn't run. For a compatibility patch, requiring you to manually configure it is terrible. I hated that. And there really wasn't an elegant solution to that didn't involve learning to code, which I still haven't done, but thankfully Hailstorm is a mad genius, and they've made something called the enemy list replacer. The enemy list replacer essentially completely bypasses all the original stuff about encounter lists, supported followers, all of that jazz. The game still has the same questions. It says, what's the encounter list for this mission? What are the followers and the leaders on those lists? What are their weights? What are their force levels? The game still asks all of that, but we're feeding different information into it rather than the original list. This is super important for compatibility. It's the massive breakthrough that makes this mod so much better than my old ones, because now, instead of having to worry about people releasing their mods too early or after mine, they just don't even get referenced. I don't care what your mod said anymore. My mod's the one going in. Additionally, and this is incredible, in the previous versions, the reason you had to do that editing or match my mods exactly is because if you weren't running with Frost Legion and you ran overhauls, the game would be like, oh, hey, I want to spawn a Frost Trooper. Wait, what's a Frost Trooper? And then the game would crash. That wasn't great. That was the problem for compatibility. But Hailstorm's enemy list replacer has a check. Is there a template for that enemy? No? All right, cool. We're not going to put that on the encounter list anyway. We're not rolling for that one. That means that I can support, and I can support literally every mod on the workshop. If I'm missing one, tell me. I'll support it. It's really easy with the new stuff. I'll get into that in a second. But I am supporting literally every mod on the workshop. And you only need to install enemy list replacer. It doesn't matter what mods you do or don't run. If you run them, my mod is going to adjust their weights and do its thing. And if you don't, my mod's not going to crash your game. It's genuinely universal, and that's fucking incredible. I had just accepted that that was a problem that couldn't be solved, and I'm so happy to see that I'm wrong. The main benefit for you as the user compared to my old ECPs is wider support and genuine universality without requiring you to do any I&I adjusting at all of your own. There's a major benefit for me as well, though, which is that once you set up this mod the way I have, it's tremendously easier to add support for new mods. If you have any mod that you're going to release or that someone else released and you want it to be supported by my stuff, just like at me on Steam or in Discord, and I can add support for it in probably under an hour. That's how easy it is to work with, because the original purpose of this mod for Hailstorm was to make it easier for them to update their own stuff on their end. And it is tremendously easier to work with. Adding Long War the Chosen support to this mod, and this mod has Long War the Chosen support, was maybe 1,000 lines of code for the entire thing, and just the encounter list for Long War the Chosen was 22,000 lines of code in Mod Jam. That's how much more compact and easy to work with this thing is. The enemy list replacer is absolutely fucking incredible, and this mod only exists because that was made. Anyways, I hope that was a good explanation of exactly what this mod does and how awesome Hailstorm's enemy list replacer is as a utility. Thank you for your time. Good luck with your mod setup.